and then bring up the cameras and welcome everyone to another Sunday night edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Hope everyone's having a wonderful week this week, or had a great week, great weekend. I guess there was football games today. I kind of blew them all off. Had to work on a emergency project that had to get taken care of. But yeah, there'll be Super Bowl in 2 weeks, I guess. We are continuing tonight, and we are going to continue the next few weeks with Hardy Boys, House on the Cliff. Last week we talked about briefly the history of the Ultra Boys. The Hardy Boys were first published in 1927 by the Edward Stridemeyer, by the founder of the Stridemeyer Syndicate. They were ghostwriters creating the stories of the two mystery solving brothers, including noted Canadian writer Charles McFarlane. And so tonight we will be doing this most definitely. We've got a couple of big announcements coming up. A slight change of plans for the Valentine's Day show. We are still going to be doing the Hardy Boys on the Sunday before Valentine's Day because it just made more sense that it's that long a stretch. And so on the other show that we do here, the Conversation Station, that Thursday night show, we will be doing a movie. And it will be a kind of love story, kind of helping to set off the day of Valentine's Day, day of love, and all that fun stuff. And I know my executive producer is looking forward to seeing the movie because I've seen it and she has not. So I'm kind of excited about that. But with everything here on the show, we are going to get started, but kind of like to remind everybody to please and thank you, like and subscribe. It does help the algorithm and it does push me over the very small limit that we're at. Haha. But we are excited by the movie in a few weeks, and this story, already 4 chapters in, it has been a lot of fun. If you guys want to say hi, let me know. JoelK_OG at Comcast.net. Thank you for everybody who's been writing. I appreciate it. It's been nice hearing from everybody around the country. Let's get started. So kick back, take your shoes off, kick back in your chair, turn down the lights if you want, and we're going to read. And coming up now is the Hardy Boys, the House on the Cliff, the next 4 chapters. Let's get going. Chapter 5, The Rescue. The Hardy Boys knew that they had no time to lose. It was evident from the struggles of the man in the water that he was not an expert swimmer. So far, he had not seen the boys, but they could hear him shouting for help, possibly thinking, however, that it was in vain, for it was a lonely part of the bay, and the nearest farmhouse outside of the deserted Palooka place was more than half a mile down the road. "Quick!" shouted Frank. "I see a rowboat up the shore." His sharp eyes had discerned a small boat almost hidden in a small cove some distance away from the bottom of the steep declivity that was the beginning of the cliff. It could not be reached by going along the shore, and the boys saw that they would have to go along the high ground and then descend to it, for a huge rock that jutted out into the deep water cut the cove off from the more open part of the beach. They left the motorcycles on the side of the road and hurried back up the slope, then cut down across a narrow strip of weeds and grass until they came to the top of the declivity. They could still see the victim of the explosion struggling in the waves. The man had seized a piece of the wreckage and was able to remain afloat, but the boys knew it was only a matter of time before his strength would give out. "Looks to be almost all in," remarked Frank. "I wonder if he's anybody we know," came from his brother. "It isn't likely," Frank reached out suddenly and caught hold of his brother's arm. "Look out there, or you'll break a leg." "It certainly is mighty slippery," answered Joe, as he managed to regain his footing. He had come close to going heels over head on the rocks. Slipping and scrambling, they made their way down the slope towards the little cove. Rocks went tumbling and rolling ahead of them. The distance was only a few yards, but the slope was steep, and a false step might result in broken bones. But they reached the bottom in safety, and there came upon the rowboat. It was battered and old, but evidently still seaworthy. "Into the water with her," said Frank. They seized the boat, and the keel grated on the shingle as the little craft was launched. Swiftly they fixed the oars in the locks, and they began to scramble into places. They began to row with strong, steady strokes out towards the man in the bay. He had seen them, and was now shouting to them to hurry. "He'd better off if it kept quiet," Joe said. "He's only wasting his strength." Evidently this thought occurred to the victim of the wreck, or else he was becoming weaker, for his cries died away and the boys did not hear him again. Frank thought he may have gone beneath the waves, and he cast a quick look around, but the fellow was still in view, clinging desperately to his bit of wreckage. The motorboat in the background was still blazing fiercely. Flames were shooting high in the sky, and the craft was plainly doomed. A great pillar of smoke was rolling into the sky from the burning boat. As for the other motorboat, Frank could hear the roar of its exhaust as it continued its flight out into the bay. For a while he could see its dim shape when it turned around once in a while, but then the fleeing boat disappeared into the mist and the gloom. The boys exerted all their strength, and the little rowboat fairly leaped over the waves. Both were good oarsmen, and it was not long before they had drawn close to the man in the water. But it looked as though they might be too late. When they were only a few yards away, Frank looked around to shout encouragement to the victim in the wreck. Even as he looked, he saw the man wearily give up his grasp on the piece of wreckage to which he had been clinging. Frank had a glimpse of the white face and despairing eyes, and then the man sank slowly beneath the waves. "He's drowning, Joe," shouted Frank as he bent the oar again. With a mighty effort, they brought the boat close to the place where the man had gone down. Frank leaped to the side of the boat and peered into the depths. He began taking off his coat, preparing to dive to the rescue. Then the fellow came to the surface again, gasping for breath, but so weak he could scarcely make a struggle. He emerged from the water right beside the boat, and Frank leaned over, grasping him by the hand, this sufficient to prevent the man from sinking for the second time, and Frank managed to get the grip on the collar of the coat. Then, with Joe helping and in imminent danger of upsetting the boat, he managed to drag the stranger out to the side of the craft. The fellow was dead weight, for he had lapsed into unconsciousness when Frank seized him, but somehow they contrived to get him into the boat, and there he lay, sprawled helplessly, more dead than alive. "We better get him to shelter someplace and revive him," said Joe. "We can't do much for him here." "How about the farmhouse down the bay?" "The very place. Where is it?" They finally located the farmhouse, a snug little building off the main road some distance down the bay. It meant considerable rowing, but there was a life at stake. The blazing motorboat nearby was a roaring mass of flames. Then it began to sink beneath the waves. There was a great hissing sound and a heavy cloud of steam as the craft sank lower and lower into the water, its blazing embers blackening to the touch of the sea. Swiftly, at last, the boat disappeared. Its stern seemed to hesitate for a moment, and then it slid quickly down into the waves, and only a trace was the widening pool of oil and scattered wreckage on the surface of the water. The Hardy Boys were too busy to give more than a passing notice to the spectacle. Their immediate problem was to get the stranger under shelter. Frank decided that there was no necessity for first aid. The man had been conscious when he rose from the water for the first time, so there could not be much water in his lungs. He had simply given in to exhaustion and fatigue resulting from his long struggle in the waves. They headed the boat down the bay in a direct line with a little farmhouse, which they could see nestling among the trees. They had already spent much energy in rowing out to the rescue of the stranger, but they fell into a new task with a will. Rowing with machine-like precision, they felt the little boat respond to every effort, and it fairly leapt along. This time they had the wind and the waves, and with them they had made good time. The man they had rescued lay face down in the bottom of the boat. He was a slim, black-haired fellow. His clothes, which was, of course, were soaked with water, were cheap and worn, the sleeves being frayed at the cuffs. They could not see his face, but they judged him to be young. He was still unconscious. Frank let Joe take his oar for a moment and crouched down beside the stranger. He turned the man over, and the limp form lolled about like helpless as a bag of salt. As he had surmised, he was a young fellow with sharp, clean-cut features. He wore a cheap shirt opened at the throat. Frank pressed his ear to the fellow's chest and listened for signs of life. Finally, he straightened up with a mutter of satisfaction. "His heart's beating all right," he told Joe. "He's alive at any rate. Just all in. He'll come to after a while." He returned to his oar, and the little boat skimmed over the waves on toward the farmhouse in the distance. The boys rowed until their muscles of their arms were aching, but at last they drew near the shore, and finally the pebbles grated underneath the keel. Frank leapt out of the and dragged the boat part way under the beach. Then, between them, they carried the unconscious man up the rocky shore towards the farmhouse. They found a path that led through a field up to the back door of the house, and although their burden was heavy, they managed to carry the still limp, motionless figure across the field. A gaunt, kindly-faced woman came hurrying out of the house as they approached, and from the orchard nearby came a man in overalls. The farmer and his wife had seen them. "Laws! What happened now?" asked the woman, wide-eyed, as they came up to her. "This man was mighty nearly drowned out in the bay," explained Frank. "We saw your house. Bring him in," boomed the farmer. "Bring him indoors." The woman ran ahead of them and held the door open. With the farmer giving aid, the boys carried the unconscious man into the house and placed him on the couch in the comfortable furnished living room. The farmer's wife glanced dubiously at the stream of water that dripped from the victim's clothes, for she was a tidy soul, and she had just scrubbed the floor that morning, but her better nature overcame her housewifely instincts, and she hastened out of the kitchen to prepare hot drinks. "Best rub his hands," suggested the farmer. He was a burly man with a black beard. "It'll bring the blood back into his cheeks. Once one of you takes off his boots, we'll wrap his feet up in warm flannels." For the next 5 minutes, the house was a scene of excitement as the farmer and his wife bustled about and the Hardy Boys rubbed industriously at the hands and the feet of the unconscious man, trying to restore him to consciousness. At last, there was a sign of reviving life. The man on the couch stirred feebly, his eyelids fluttered, his lips moved, but no words came. Then his eyes opened, and he stared at them as though in a daze. "Where am I?" he muttered faintly. "You're safe," Frank assured him. "You're with friends." "Pretty near crashed in, didn't I?" "Yes, you pretty nearly drowned, but you're all right now." "It was Snackley," said the stranger, as though talking to himself. "Snackley got me, the rat." Chapter 6. Snackley. At that moment the farmer's wife appeared, bringing the drink of hot ginger and water, which the man on the couch gulped down gratefully. "We'll put him in the spare room, Mabel," decided the farmer. "He needs a good warm bed more than anything else now. I'll look after him if these boys here'll help me." I think I was shot," muttered the stranger. He motioned weakly towards his side. Frank leaned over. "Why, there's blood on his coat," he exclaimed. A hasty examination showed the stranger was right. There was a bullet wound in his side. It was evidently not serious, merely a flesh wound, but it had bled freely and the man was weakened. Gently the boys removed his clothing, and with warm water and a sponge the farmer bathed the wound. The bullet had passed right through the fellow's coat after searing a path across the side. Disinfectant was then applied, the stranger gritting his teeth with pain, and after the bandages were put in place. "Now we can put him to bed. Can you walk, stranger?" The man made an effort to rise, then fell back weakly on the couch. "I'm afraid I can't." "All right, then. We'll carry you. Give me a hand with him, lads." Between them, they carried the wounded man upstairs into a plain but comfortably furnished room. Here he was put to bed and covered with warm blankets. With a sigh of relief, he closed his eyes. "He's weak from loss of blood. That's mostly what's the matter with him," the farmer said. "We'll let him have a good sleep." They left the room, and when they went into the kitchen again, the Hardy boys told the farmer and his wife of the strange adventure they had just been through. The farmer listened thoughtfully. "Odd," he observed. "Mighty odd." Then, glancing significantly at his wife, he said, "What do you think of it, Mabel?" "I think the same as you, Bill, and you know it. Most likely it's been another one of them smuggling mix-ups." The farmer nodded. "I've an idea it's something like that." "Smuggling?" Frank exclaimed. "Sure, there's been quite a bit of smuggling goes on around Barmet Bay, you know. Leastways, there has been in the past few months. That's been my suspicions, anyway. I've seen too many motorboats out in the bay of late, and heard too many of them prowling around at night. If it's not smuggling, it's some other kind of unlawful business." "Do you think this fellow may have been shot in some kind of smuggler's quarrel?" The farmer shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe. I ain't saying nothing. I ain't safe to say anything when you don't know for certain. But I wouldn't be mighty surprised." Mr. and Mrs. Kane, as they introduced themselves, were just about to have dinner when they invited the Hardy boys to stay. The lads were glad to do, and they were very tired from their exertions of the morning, and already feeling the pangs of hunger. They sat down to the simple but ample meal, typical farm fare of roast beef and baked pork and beans, with creamy mashed potatoes topped off with rich lemon pie, frothy with meringue and fragrant coffee. During the meal they discussed the strange affair of the bay. The boys did not mention their experiences at the Palooka place, for they had learned that one of the chief requisites of a good detective is to keep his ears open and his mouth shut, and to hear more than he tells. At that, one mystery was enough for the dinner. "I'd like to find out more about this affair," said Frank, when the meal was concluded, and Mr. Kane sat back luxuriously in his chair and puffed at his pipe. "Perhaps that fellow is awake now. Wouldn't do any harm to see. You might ask him a few questions. I'm just as curious about it as you guys are." They went upstairs. The stranger was sleeping when they looked in the room, but the slight noise they made awakened him, and he gazed at them dully. Feeling better? Joe asked. Oh, yes, replied the stranger weakly. I must have lost a lot of blood, though. That was when they shot you just before the boat blew up, said Frank. The man in the bed nodded, but said nothing. What's your name, stranger? Asked Mr. Kane bluntly. The man in the bed hesitated a moment. Jones, he said at last. It was so evidently a false name that the Hardy boys glanced at one another, and the farmer scratched his chin doubtfully. How come you in such this mess as this? He asked at last. What were they shooting at you for? Don't ask me, please, said the mysterious Jones. I can't tell you. I can't tell you anything. I suppose you know these young fellows saved your life. Yes, I know, and I'm very grateful. But don't ask me any questions. I can't tell you anything about it. You won't even tell them? Not after they saved your life? Jones shook his head stubbornly. I can't explain anything about it. Please go away. Let me sleep. Frank signaled Joe to the farmer that it would be best if they withdrew, so they left the room and closed the door. When they went back downstairs, the farmer was grumbling to himself. I'm hanged if he ain't the most closed-mouthed lad I've ever seen, he declared. You saved his life, and he won't tell you why he was racing around the bay in a motorboat with fellows shooting at him. He must have good reason. It's his own business after all, reflected Frank. We can't force him to explain anything. He's in with them smugglers. That's what he is, declared Mr. Kane with conviction. I guess we'd better be getting home. Do you mind keeping him here? We can have him moved to a hospital. The farmer shook his head. Smuggler or not, he stays here until he gets better. Nobody ever said Bill Kane turned a sick man out of doors, and nobody ever will. He stays here until he gets better. We'll come back in a day or so and see how he's getting along, Joe promised. He'll have the best care here. Whether it's smuggling or not he's mixed up in, it doesn't matter. My wife and I will look after him. The Hardy boys arranged to have the rowboat return to the mooring place. Then they took their leave to the good-hearted farmer and his wife and made their way out to the road. Then they went back to the place where they left their motorcycles, and in a short while they were speeding in on return to Bayport. That fellow is certainly an odd stick, remarked Joe, as he and his brother motored toward home. I'll say he is. There's something mighty odd about all of this, and don't you forget it, said Frank. It was mid-afternoon when they turned their motorcycles into the driveway beside the Hardy home. And after they put their machines in the garage, they went into the house. They found their father, Fenton Hardy, in his den just off the library. He was never too busy to talk to his sons, and when they came in, he put down his papers. He was studying and leaned back in his chair. Well, you two have been up today. What have you been up to today? He inquired, smiling. We had a real adventure this time, Dad, Frank told him. We were out of the old Palooka place with some of the fellows. That's the haunted house, isn't it? See any ghosts? The boys looked at each other. No, we didn't see any ghosts exactly, but... You don't mean to tell me you heard some? Benton Hardy threw his head back and laughed with delight. You may laugh, but something mighty odd things happen out there, insisted Joe. Whereupon the brothers told their father the strange experience of the deserted farmhouse, but Mr. Hardy refused to take them seriously. Some of your school chums playing a joke on you, he said, dismissing the affair. They'll be laughing their heads off about it right now. But how do you account for the toolbox being robbed? They just did it to make it a little more mysterious. Probably they hand it back to you at school on Monday, just to prove their story. This aspect of the situation had not occurred to the boys. They began to look a bit sheepish. it had been the work of practical jokers, it was only natural they would seek something definite, thereby to prove the fact they had been at the farmhouse. Gosh, I will never hear the end of it, if that's the case, sighed Joe. Oh well, we'll have to take it in good part. But we didn't tell you about what happened on the way home. Tell him, Frank. Another adventure? A real one. No practical joke about this. Frank thereupon told his father about the two motorboats in Barman Bay, about the chase and the resulting explosion. He modestly underestimated their own part in the rescue of the victim of the wreck, but Fenton Hardy nodded his head in satisfaction as the story went on. Good work, he muttered. You've saved a fellow's life anyway, and it looks as though you've stumbled onto a mysterious bit of business in that motorboat chase. What did the man say his name was? Jones, answered Frank doubtfully. Fenton Hardy raised his eyebrows. Of course. There's lots of Joneses in the world. It might be his real name, but more than likely it isn't. Wouldn't he tell you anything about the reason for the chase? Did you question him? He wouldn't tell us anything at all. He made a few inquiries, but he said we couldn't explain. Still more mysterious, reflected the detective. Do you think he will talk when he gets better? I'm afraid not. He seemed quite determined not to tell us anything about himself or about the men who were chasing him. Don't you remember, Frank? Exclaimed Joe. When we brought him into the house just as he became conscious again. What was that he said? Oh, yes, I'd forgotten. He said Snackerly got me, the rat, whatever that meant. Snackerly, exclaimed Fenton Hardy, staring up. Are you sure he said Snackerly? Are you sure that was the name? I'm certain, aren't you, Joe? Yes, that was the name, all right. Well, that does give us something to work on, said the detective. Probably you've never heard of Snackerly, but I have. Who is he? Gainey Snackerly, a noted criminal. He is a smuggler, one of the leaders of a ring of smugglers who bring in opium and other drugs from the Orient. Is it possible that he is bringing drugs into the country at Barman Bay? Chapter 7. Bound and Gagged. The Hardy boys were astonished by this information. Their father, tapping a pencil quickly on the desk, leaned forward on his chair. You may have stumbled onto some information of great value, he said to them quietly. I need hardly tell you that it is best to keep it to yourself. If Gainey Snackerly is operating in the vicinity, it will be a great feather in our cap to catch her. It's an unusual name, remarked Frank. I'll bet that's the Snackerly our man meant, all right. And the farmer said there was smuggling going on in the bay, Joe pointed out. Of course, there's always been more or less smuggling carried on in Barman Bay, but it's all been on small scale. Gainey Snackerly and his gang are international smugglers. The last I heard of him, he was operating up on the New England coast, but probably things grew too hot for him and he moved down here. He seems to have dropped completely out of sight for the past 6 months or so. Perhaps this man Jones at the farmhouse will talk later. I'm going out there to interview him, said Fenton Hardy. I'll wait a few days until he is feeling better. Of course, the matter is one for the U.S. authorities, and I haven't been assigned to the case. I can't do very much, but perhaps I'll get some information I can at some other time. Joe and I will go out tomorrow and see if he's getting along. Do so, but don't ask questions. Don't let him think you are suspicious of him. Otherwise, he's liable to sneak away as soon as he can, and we'll lose him altogether. He is under an obligation to you now because you saved his life, so it is quite natural for you to come back to see him. If you think he's recovering quickly, let me know, and I'll go out right away and talk to him. If you think there will be there for several days yet, we'll just let him stay until he feels better. Perhaps he is a detective himself, Frank suggested. That had occurred to me too, admitted Mr. Hardy. If that's the case, I'll keep out of the affair. It's just probable that he is a Secret Service man who discovered Snackerly's hideout and was shot for his pains. That would explain why he wouldn't tell you anything about himself. But there is always the possibility he is one of Snackerly's enemies, and in that case I may be able to persuade him to talk. Benton Hardy asked the boys more questions about their adventure, but beyond a few trivial details they were unable to throw any further light on the mystery. However, it was decided that they should go back to the Kane farmhouse on the following day, which was Sunday, and report on the condition of the mysterious Mr. Jones. With that, they left their father, spending the rest of the afternoon in eager discussion and speculation concerning the strange event of the day. It had been an eventful holiday for them, and although they went over the incidents time and again, they were unable to arrive at any solution of the puzzling affair of Barmont Bay. Barmont Bay. As for the happenings at the house on the cliff, they were inclined to accept their father's theory that some practical joker had been to blame. The next morning after church, they took the motorcycles out of the garage and prepared to ride out to the Kane farmhouse, there to make inquiry as to the condition of the man they had rescued the previous day. Remember, warned their father, don't ask him too many questions or he'll get suspicious. Just find out how long he's likely to remain at the farmhouse, and if his injuries aren't very severe, he'll leave in a day or so, and we want to check up on him. The boys promised to follow the detective's instructions. Unlike the previous day, this Sunday was clear and bright, and the rain of the afternoon before had laid the dust so that they enjoyed the journey out along the shore road. It would be a bad joke on us if Mr. Jones left before we got there, remarked Joe. I don't think he will. That wound in his side was enough to keep him laid up for a few days. And anyway, he lost so much blood yesterday, it would take him a while to get his strength back. I hope he isn't a detective. Why? It would be great to get a chance to do some great work on this case ourselves. If Gainey Snackerly is in the neighborhood and the government detectives don't know it, we could help Dad land him. It would be a great chance, admitted Frank. But I think we'll find our friend Jones is a detective. But I think we'll find our friend Jones is a detective. That is, if we ever find out anything definitive about him. Why else would Snackerly and his men try to kill him? For there's no doubt they left him for dead. Perhaps he was another smuggler that they wanted to get rid of. Maybe. But I think it's more likely he's a Secret Service man. At length they arrived at the house leading from the main road to the farmhouse. As their motorcycles whirred down the drive, they watched for some sign of life about the place. But there was no one in the orchard or in the barnyard. There was no one out of the house. The place appeared to be deserted, and although it was a warm day, the doors were closed. This is odd, remarked Frank, as they brought their motorcycles to a stop and left them in the shade of a large tree underneath the back of the house. Mr. and Mrs. Kane couldn't have gone away and left Jones there alone, could they? The boys went up to the door and rapped. There was no answer. Try the front door, Joe suggested. After a number of futile efforts, they went to the front door of the farmhouse, but there also they banged on the panels. There was likewise no response. They must have gone out, said Joe. But what about Jones? They wouldn't leave him here alone. I can't understand this. They went to the back door and rapped again and again. Still, there was no answer. Frank tried the doorknob and found the door swung open. They didn't lock the place up, anyway. Let's go in and see if Jones is upstairs. We'll go up and see. Mr. Kane wouldn't mind. Probably they didn't expect callers today. They went into the kitchen, and here they were surprised by a scene of disorder that greeted their gaze. The previous day they had impressed by the neatness of the room, for Mrs. Kane was evidently the soul of tidiness. Now the kitchen looked as though an earthquake had shaken it. Pots and pans were strewn about the floor. The table had been overturned. A chair lay upside down in the corner. A few cups and saucers were shattered bits by the stove. The wood box had been upset and the wood scattered about. One window curtain had been partially torn from its fastenings. What on earth happened here? Frank exclaimed in profound astonishment. Looks as if a cyclone came through. There's something odd about this. There's been a fight or a struggle of some kind here. Let's see what the rest of the house looks like. The Hardy boys rushed through the next room. There, an unexpected sight met their eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Kane were seated in chairs in the middle of the room. They were unable to move, unable to speak, scarcely able to struggle. The wife and the farmer and his wife were bound and gagged, tied to their chairs. Chapter 8. The Stolen Witness. Man, guys, I gotta adjust the chair. Ugh. There we go. Swiftly, the Hardy boys rushed over to the Mr. and Mrs. Kane and began to release them. The farmer and his wife had been trussed up by strong ropes, and they had been so well gagged that they had been unable to mutter a sound. It was only a matter of minutes, however, before their bonds were loosened and gags removed. Thank goodness! Exclaimed Mrs. Kane with a sigh of relief as the gag was taken away. Her husband, sputtering with rage, rose from his chair and hurled the ropes to his side. What happened? Asked the boys in amazement. For a moment, Mr. and Mrs. Kane were unable to give a coherent account of the experience, owing to the strain they had undergone. But at last the farmer stumbled over to the window and pointed out down to the shore road. They went that way, he roared. That way. Follow them. Who? The rascals who tied us up. They took Jones away with them. Kidnapped him? Yes, kidnapped him. There were 4 of them. They broke in here and tied my wife and me up. Then they went upstairs, carried Jones away with them. They dumped him into an automobile and made the getaway. 4 men? 4 of the ugliest looking scoundrels I've ever laid eyes on. How long ago? Said Frank quickly. They didn't leave 10 minutes ago. If you had been here just a few minutes earlier, you would have seen the whole crowd of them. The farmer was angry and excited. But there's time. You can catch them. They went down the shore road. Come on, Joe, shouted Frank. Let's chase them. They've kidnapped Jones. Joe needed no urging. The Hardy boys left the farmer and his wife rubbing their chafed wrists and ankles and hastened out of the house over their motorcycles. Within a few seconds, the staccato roar of the powerful machines broke out in the still air, and then they went rocketing, swaying down the lane out onto the shore road. Some high-handed proceeding, I'll say, yelled Frank, to make himself heard over the roar of the motorcycles. Those rascals ought to be in prison, returned the brother. The boys followed the direction the farmer indicated. Frank then recollected that before they turned in toward the Kane farm, they had seen a cloud of dust down the main road, evidently caused by the speeding automobile, but had thought nothing of it at the time, for the traffic along the shore highway occasioned no comment, especially on Sunday. If we had only been here earlier, he groaned. We'll catch up with them. They haven't much of a start. Maybe we could follow them to some town and have the whole gang arrested. The motorcycles roared along the top speed. Both Hardy boys were skillful drivers, and for a while Frank was able to pursue the course of the car they were pursuing by watching the fresh tread marks in the dust. But then the road they came to a place where it intersected, and the road leading up to the Morton farm, the tread marks became lost, as evidently another car had turned out into the side road in the meantime and obliterated the fresh tread here and there. They passed that lane that led to the Palooka place and continued down the shore road until they came to a hilltop that commanded a view of the stretch of the county. Here they could see the road winding and dipping for a distance of more than a mile until it was lost to sight in a grove of trees, but there was no sign of the automobile they were seeking. "They've given us the slip, I guess," said Frank, as he brought his motorcycles to a stop. "They had a good start, and they weren't letting the grass grow underneath their feet either. Think we should keep going?" "There's not much use. We'd better go back to the farmhouse and hear what Mr. and Mrs. Kane have to say about this." They turned their motorcycles about and headed back towards the farm. On the way, they discussed the mysterious kidnapping. "Evidently, those men in the other boat saw us rescue Jones, or else they had heard that they had been taken to the farm," remarked Joe. "They must be desperate characters." "I wonder what will happen to poor Jones now," said Frank gravely. "They tried to kill him in the first place this time. You think they'll murder him?" "It looks like that. They didn't show him any mercy out in the bay. They left him for dead that time. Now they'll make sure of it." Joe shuddered. "If they're going to kill him, they'll hardly go to all the bother of kidnapping him," he pointed. "Perhaps they wanted to keep him out of the way. Perhaps they were afraid he would tell about their chasing him and setting fire to his boat. They were mighty anxious to get their hands on him when they got to the house in broad daylight and tie up Mr. and Mrs. Kane. Gee, it's lucky we came along when we did. They might have been left there for hours without being able to get loose." When they got back to the farmhouse, they found the farmer and his wife had somewhat recovered from their harrowing experience, although they were still unnerved. Mrs. Kane, ever the true housewife, was already beginning to tidy up the kitchen and the living room from the intruders had upset everything in the struggle. "We lost them," said Frank. Kane nodded. "I didn't think you'd catch them," he said. "They left here in such a hurry, but I hoped you would. They had a big, high-powered car, and they didn't waste any time getting away." "There were 4 of them, you said?" "4. Ugly villains." "What did they look like?" "Didn't get much of a chance to see. All happened too quickly. One of them came to the door. He was a tall chap with a thin face, and he asked if I was looking after a man who'd almost drowned yesterday. I said that I was, and he told me that he had come to take him away, that he was a brother of the fellow. I got kind of suspicion and asked him his name, but in the meantime had stepped outside the door. Before I knew it, someone jumped me from behind. I put up a fight as best as I could, but the others came at me from around the corner of the house where they had been hiding, and before I knew it, I was tied up. Therein they tied up my wife and left us in the living room while they went upstairs." "Did Jones put up a fight when they took him away?" "He tried to. He hollered for help, but of course I couldn't do anything, and he was weak from to fight much himself. They carried him down the staircase, and put him in the automobile. Then they drove away." "There must be more to this affair than we imagine," reflected Frank. "It's getting serious when they break into private homes like this." "You bet it's getting serious," exclaimed the farmer. "It'll be mighty serious for them if they try it again." He motioned to the table where the shotgun was lying. "I've got that gun loaded and waiting for the next gang that tries anything like that. I only wish I had it ready this morning." "I don't think you'll have any cause to use it," Frank said reassuringly. "It was Jones they were after. They won't bother you again." "They'd better not." "I think it's best thing we do, Joe, is to go back to Bayport and let Dad know about this." "Good idea. We can't do anything by staying here. You boys said yesterday that your name was Hardy, eh? Ain't any relation to Fenton Hardy, are you?" "He's our father." "The detective?" Boys nodded in assessment. "Good!" exclaimed Kane. You go right back and tell him about this. And if anyone can get to the bottom of this affair, it's him. I hate to see them rascals get away scot free. Joe and Frank bade goodbye to the farmer and his wife and returned to their motorcycles. They promised to call again at the Kane farm as soon as it was possible to give further information, and Mr. Kane, in turn, gave his promise to notify them if there was any further trace of the kidnappers or the mysterious Jones. When they returned to Bayport, the boys lost no time in reaching home. Fenton Hardy was enjoying one of his rare afternoons of leisure and reading, but put the book aside when the boys rushed into the library. Did Mr. Jones talk? He asked quickly, seeing by their expressions that something unusual had happened. He didn't get a chance to. We didn't get a chance to see him," exclaimed Joe. "What's the matter? Did he clear out?" "He was kidnapped." "Kidnapped? 4 men broke into the farmhouse and took him away," said Frank hurriedly. Then they proceeded to tell the story of the strange events of the morning at the Kane farm, prompted occasionally by Joe. Mr. Hardy was deeply interested. "There is only one theory I can think of," he said at last. "This Jones, or whatever his name is, must belong to a gang, or either squealed on them or threatened to do so. They tried to get rid of him, and he escaped in the motorboat, but they thought they had finished him in the explosion. Then they found out you had rescued him, so they went to the farmhouse and took him away before he had a chance to talk." "You think they're smugglers?" "Probably. While you were away this morning, I called up one of the government authorities in the city, and he told me that they believe smugglers are operating in Barmet Bay on the big scale. Did you tell did you tell him about Snackley?" Mr. Hardy smiled. "Not yet. That information I thought I would keep to myself for a time being. But I wonder if Snackley came here. It begins to look like it. It was kind of he is the kind who wouldn't stop at anything from kidnapping to murder. Do the authorities suspect him of being around here?" "I imagine so. The man I was talking to mentioned the fact that the smugglers are the kind that are in the drug line, and Snackley is a king of dope smugglers on the Atlantic coast. Gee, I wish we could have landed him." "Of course," said Fenton Hardy. "No one has asked us to work on this case, and I don't believe in working for nothing." "You mean you won't help?" asked Joe in disappointment. Fenton Hardy's eyes twinkled as he went on. "I don't believe in working for nothing," he repeated. "But if we ever caught this man Snackley, it would be worth our while." "Why?" "The reward. There's a reward offered for him. There has been a standing reward of $5,000 offered for Snackley's capture for some time. And if he's operating in Barmet Bay, as I suspect, it is possible that we might be able to collect the reward." "Good!" exclaimed Frank. "Let's go after it." Chapter 9. We want to do one more chapter, guys? Yeah, let's do one more chapter. Let's do one more chapter. This is chapter 9. The Strange Message. The Hardy Boys expected the next day that they would find them busy on a more detailed investigation of circumstances. Hang on, guys. I gotta have a little drink of water. Voice is a little dry today. There we go. There we go. The Hardy Boys expected that the next day would find them busy on more detailed investigation of the circumstances surrounding the mysterious kidnapping. But, to their surprise, when they came down to breakfast the next morning, they found their father had gone away. Mrs. Hardy could not enlighten him. He went out early this morning and didn't say when he would be back. But he didn't take any baggage with him, so I imagine he hasn't gone very far. He'd probably be back sometime today. Mrs. Hardy was accustomed to the comings and goings of her husband, and nothing surprised her. She realized that his profession demanded that he do many things that were mysterious enough on the surface, but reasonable enough that when came time came to explain them. But the boys were taken aback, where they had looked forward to seeing their father in the morning and had hoped he would lay a plan of campaign before them. They went to school in disappointment. On the way, they met Callie Shaw and Iola Morton, two girls who were particular friends of the boys. Callie Shaw, a brown eyed, brown haired girl, was an object of special enthusiasm for Frank, who was apt to cast an appreciative eye upon the other sex, while Iola, a plump, dark girl, sister of Chet Morton, was all right as a girl in Joe's reluctant opinion. Chet had told his sister about the affair at the Palooka place on the previous Saturday, and she in turn told Callie. "Well, how are the ghost hunters this morning?" asked Callie. "Fine," replied Frank with a smile. "What a brave bunch of boys you all are," exclaimed a girl, "running away from an empty house." "That house wasn't empty," put in Joe warmly. "I suppose you think our motorcycle tools walked away. Somebody played a pretty good practical joke on you. Just wait till you get to school. Whoever played the trick on you will be sure to tell everybody." "Oh well, we can stand it. If Chet Morton hadn't been with us at the time, I would have blamed him. It was like one of his pet ideas." "He can prove his alibi all this time," said Iola. "He was right with you. And by the way he talked when he got home, I think he was badly frightened as anyone." But when the boys reached school, they found that although news of their experience of the house on the cliff had preceded them, no one was laying claim to having originated the joke. Chet and the other boys had told of the escapade, and although they momentarily expected some practical jester would come forward and take credit for the whole affair, nothing of the sort happened. And when noon came, it was as much a mystery as ever. "I'm beginning to think this wasn't a joke at all," admitted Joe on the way home. "Believe me, it would have been a trick played on us. The fellow who did it wouldn't have lost time coming around to have the horse laugh. It was a little too well done to be a joke. I think I think someone started this ghost rumor just to keep people away from the Palooka place. If everyone gets the same reception we got, I don't blame them for staying away. What with that weird yell and shrieks and the walls falling in and the toolboxes being robbed, it's a mighty active ghost they have on the job. I wonder, could it have anything to do with the smugglers, Joe?" The Hardy's boys looked at each other. "There's a thought," exclaimed Joe. We might we had two mighty strange things happen to us on the same day. Perhaps they have something to do with each other. It might be a coincidence, but when you come to think of it, the house on the cliff would be a mighty handy hangout for smugglers if they could keep strangers away. And what better way than starting the story of the place is haunted? Gosh, I never thought of that. I wonder what Dad thinks of it. Perhaps he's home now. We'll mention it to him." But when they returned home for lunch, they found that Fenton Hardy had not come back. Neither was he at home when the school closed for the day, and when the Hardy boys went to bed that night, there had been not the slightest word from their father, nor any indication of where he had gone. In spite of the fact that they were accustomed to these sudden absences, the lads felt vaguely uneasy. "I don't know why," said Frank next morning, "but I have but I have a sort of feeling that everything isn't all right. I've been feeling that way myself. Of course, Dad has often gone away from home like this without telling where he was going, and he had always turned up all right. But this time, well, we'll just have to wait and see. He knows his own business best, and it's 10 chances to 1 we're worrying over nothing. But I have sort of a hunch that there is a odd thing in the woodpile." Mrs. Hardy, however, was not alarmed. "Oh, we'll walk into the house when we're least expecting him," she laughed reassuringly. "You boys are just anxious to get to work on Snackerly case. Perhaps that's what he's working on now. He'll probably be back with a lot of information." "We'd rather have him let us in on that," returned Joe. "And keep you out of school? Oh, no. He doesn't mind letting you do detective work as long as it's in your spare time." So the Hardy boys had to make the best of it. They concealed their impatience during the remainder of the week, doing their schoolwork faithfully. The following week was the start of vacation, and the lads were deep in examinations for several days, so that they had not time to think of detective activities. But on Friday afternoon, the mystery of their father's absence took a strange turn. They came home back from school to find their mother sitting in the living room, carefully examining a note that she had evidently just received. "Come here, boys," she said as they came into the room. "I want you to take a look at this and tell me what you think of it." She handed the note over to Frank. "What is it?" he asked. "Word from Dad?" "It's supposed to be." The Hardy boys read the note. It was written in pencil on a torn sheet of paper, and the handwriting seemed to be that of Fenton Hardy. The note read, "I won't be home for several days. Don't worry." It was signed by the detective. That's all. There is nothing to indicate where he was, nothing to show when the note had been written. "When did you get this?" asked Frank. "It came in the mail, afternoon mail. It was addressed to me, and the envelope had a Bayport postmark." "What is there to worry about?" Joe asked. "It's better than not hearing from him at all." "But I'm not sure it's from him." "Why?" "Your father has an arrangement with me that he would always put a secret sign beneath the signature any time he had an occasion to write me like this. He was always afraid of people forging his name to letters and notes like this, and perhaps getting papers or information that they shouldn't. So we arranged this sign that would always be beneath his name." Frank snatched up the note again. "And there's no sign here, just his signature." "It may be a signature. If it isn't, it's a very good forgery. And it may have been that he had forgot to put the secret sign on, although it isn't like him to do that." Mrs. Hardy was plainly worried. "If he didn't write it, then who did?" asked Joe. "Your father has enemies. There are relatives of criminals whom he has had arrested, and there are criminals who have served their terms and have been released. If there has been foul play, the note might have been meant to keep us from being suspicious and delay for search." "Foul play?" exclaimed Frank. "You don't think something happened to Dad?" he added, his face showing his alarm. "The fact that he didn't put the secret sign underneath his name makes me anxious. What other object could have what other object could anyone have in sending us a note like that, if not to keep us from starting a search for him?" "Well, whether he wrote it or not, we will start a search for him," declared Frank firmly. "He merely said not to worry about him. He didn't order us not to look for him. If he really did write the note, he can't say we were disobeying instructions. And then the absence of the secret sign makes it all different." "I'll say we keep looking. I say we start looking for him," cried Joe. "Vacation starts next week, and we have plenty of time to hunt for him." "Wait until then, at any rate," Mrs. Hardy advised. "Perhaps he will return in the meanwhile." But as she glanced at the note once again, and more regarded the signature, strangely lacking its secret sign, her forebodings that Fenton Hardy had met with foul play increased. And we leave on that cliffhanger of the missing Fenton Hardy for next week's Chapter 10, The Vain Search. The Hardy Boys, The House on the Cliff. I hope you guys like that. It's been really a fun book to read, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the series. We do this series every year. By the way, this is the 2nd year anniversary of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. And we're very glad to have everybody staying with us and enjoying the books and the stories. We do this every Sunday. Sometimes we do a simulcast of a movie or two, but normally we have you join us. I read several chapters a night, and all I do is ask you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. And I appreciate you being here. I really do. Like any time we do ask you to please like and subscribe, because we love having you guys enjoying the show, and would love to have you keep following us, keep getting updates on when the show's on the air and when you can watch it again. We're going to get ready to get out of here, but like we do on our Thursday night show, we leave you with a closing thought for the night. I found this the other night, and a little dark, a little gloomy. With the way the world is nowadays, sometimes you gotta be a little mysterious. Kind of like a Hardy Boys mystery. Where one burns books, they will in the end burn human beings too. Heinrich Heine, from the middle 1800s, wrote of people who would take advantage and lie, cheat, steal, and burn books. Something we are completely against here at the show. We are going to get out of here. I want to thank you all for tuning in. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every single Sunday night here, live on Twitch, and also simulcast on YouTube. Take care, all. Be safe, be well with all the weather. Be well, be safe, be kind. There's a lot of craziness going out in the world right now. A lot of stupid people telling you what to do, how to think. There's an old Shakespeare quote. To thy own self be true. Don't let anybody tell you how to live your life, or who to love, or who to care for. And stand up for those who can't. Take care, you guys. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you this coming Thursday for the Conversation Station. And next Sunday, Chapter 10, for the Hardy Boys, House on the Cliff, here on the Book Club Reading Room. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.